Good afternoon, everybody. I am Ameet, Jani. If you're okay, we'll get started. And if anybody's playing buzzword bingo with their friends today, here's a hint. Fido is probably going to show up a lot. Anyway, let me introduce myself and, of course, Christian. Christian and I are both product managers at Google. In fact, I will go as far as to say we are the rock star product managers at Google. No, I'm just kidding. Only one of us is a rock star PM. But okay, so anyway, just a brief history on me because you're wondering who is this guy and why is he qualified to speak. I'm also one of the product managers at Google. I'm on the security team. What I wanted to talk to you about today was this idea that Google brings a unique security perspective. If you were in the last session, you probably heard some hints of that. And we want to talk to you about some of those things today, specifically around authentication and strong auth. But a big part of our story is what we call Beyond Corp. Beyond Corp is our Google model of saying VPNs are obsolete. We like to say kind of crazy, big statements like that. And the idea is we care who you are, what the attributes of who you are. So where are you coming from? What time of day are you coming from? All of these things are really unique to what we like to do. And as part of that, I think you're going to find that the strong auth story is a huge portion of that. And as a reference to why is this guy up on stage and why is he talking about what he's talking about, I have met in my course of time at Google and other places hundreds and hundreds of customers. And I think what you're going to see us present here is sort of an amalgamation of all of those things. If you have easy questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand. If you have hard questions, don't raise your hand. We'll answer your questions at the end, of course. So I thought it would make sense before we got into the real details of this to explain what Google is. For those of you who don't know, we are a search company, but all of our search is built onto our ads company, maybe is a better way of saying it. But what we are known for is having this massive infrastructure to support all of these things, right? How do you have sub-second latencies and serve up traffic around the world? If you could see the original, I'm telling you nothing proprietary here. We had this original corkboard with DRAM stuck on it. We've moved past those days now over the last 18 years. We are now running a massive infrastructure that we think of as some of the most secure. We actually, in some of our data centers, this is not a joke, in some of our more tropical ones, we have alligators that sit in a little swamp around the data center. That is a true story. And then, of course, the guns and the lasers and the sharks with the lasers on their head and all that. That part is exaggerated, but the rest of it is true. And so what we did when we started building up this infrastructure is we started with a blank slate, right? And we said we're going to create a homogeneous environment where we control everything from top to bottom. And so we introduced a lot of the things to ourselves first over the last 18 years, and as we've gotten good at them, we started to want to introduce those to our customers, and wherever applicable, we wanted to open source and push this stuff out into the web, because like our arch rivals Microsoft said this morning, if it's good, it shouldn't have to be just us. We want it to be out there in the world. And so that's sort of where we sit today, and so that's what we want you to do with some of your applications. As part of this story, what you're going to find, and I'm going to use a fancy word I learned when I joined Google, something called provenance. We own the supply chain from start to finish. I mean, and again, I'm not telling you anything proprietary to say, we are amongst the top 3 server vendors in the world. We manufacture our own servers and put them in the data center. And so we get the hardware ourselves, we build this up ourselves, we have our own custom versions of operating systems, we have our own custom versions of popular software. We have our own version of hardened KVM. I'm sure most cloud vendors will tell you that, but we don't use anything off the shelf as it is, right? We want to make sure that the footprint is secure from top to bottom. And then we constantly are auditing these binaries and updating these binaries and discovering. We have bounty programs to kind of discover problems. Actually, it's quite lucrative. I think it's like $50,000 if you find some tier 1 kind of heartbleed type problem. So it's a pretty good, if you're looking for spare change, that's not a bad place to go. And so that's sort of what we do. And so what you'll find is part of the Google security model is that we want to approach this in a couple of ways, right? We want to build everything from scratch and own it ourselves. And then we want to apply machine learning on it. I didn't believe the statistic based on my own Gmail inbox, but apparently 0.001% of spam only gets through to Gmail. And so that's the same kind of logic that we want to pass out. And then, of course, we explored new advanced forms of cryptology and things like that as well. So all of that was a 10-second background on 18 years of history of Google. I think what we really want to focus on today is authentication, right? Particularly around strong auth. And since that's Christian's bread and butter, I'm going to let him jump to that. But before we do, I did want to tell you a story about phishing, right? So I think a lot of today's discussion is going to be focused on phishing, and there's a core reason for that. As secure as an infrastructure as you can make, as secure as you make software, the #1 attack vector for almost every organization in the world whether it's government or not, or private, is phishing, right? And so over the last 3 years, at some point, I've talked to a lot of customers, and 60 to 65% of those customers have told me they have been phished, right? Which maps to sort of what we see from public studies from like Verizon and things like that. And so these victims of phishing are not always external. Sometimes they are internal organizations. I can tell you a funny story. We ourselves phish our internal employees, and we were able to phish a single-digit employee who's still at the company by promising a free Google Home. I mean, it was just something as simple as that, and the guy clicked on it. It was like, oh, free, I've got to have this. Guy's probably a multimillionaire. Clicks on this free home, Google Home, and of course, his credentials were phished. And so those are the kinds of things we don't want, right? And what we're finding, and what I'm seeing at our customers are, these are becoming far more targeted and a lot more sophisticated. This is no longer that Nigerian prince who's got money that he desperately wants to get out of the country. These are obviously very, very specific attacks. And so let me walk you through a real example. This is from a financial house we work with somewhere. And I've anonymized it so it doesn't make anyone feel embarrassed. But no one should feel embarrassed. This is exactly what happens, right? We had a customer who was running a build system. In this case, I made it Jenkins to kind of highlight that. They received an internal build announcement from Jenkins. It looks like a Jenkins email, right? I mean, if you look at the system, you couldn't even tell what the difference is. It had information from real team members. So as far as the CIO was concerned, it was a legitimate email. And it says, hey, we've made changes to the build system. I need your approval on something. Can you log in and give me the approval? It was one of 12 emails he got from his build system today. This is an actual, but this one happened to be, of course, a phished spam attack. But it looks and feels exactly like it. This is how sophisticated the attacks have gotten. So you can kind of guess what happens next, right? He gives his credentials. He doesn't think twice about it. 146 or so emails were stolen he'd written about a security architecture, IP addresses, host names, server names. All this stuff was leaked, right? Board notes, things like that. And so what you're finding is that the phishing attacks are becoming far more sophisticated at our customer sites than they've ever been. And so all of this leads to, I had that fancy build where it shows in the password. So that's why you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, Ameet, that's nice, but I'm not dumb enough to fall for that, and we have the second factor anyway. So I'm perfectly fine, right? And actually, you're actually not. And at that point, I'm going to hand it off to Christian.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Christiaan Brand. I'm the rockstar PM on Ameet's team. Now I'm lying. No. I'm Christian. I work for Google. I work on strong authentication. And today I kind of want to continue the story that Ameet told and kind of help that CIO not become the victim of phishing, right? And I guess kind of where we're coming from is no amount of emails and training is really going to prevent people from clicking on links that look very, very real. If it takes only a Google Home, right, to get even sophisticated users to click on things, it's really, really hard to kind of try and solve this from an educational standpoint, which is where we've been focused on for a long time, right? We have these green address bars, we have all these other cool things, which we train our users to look out for, but we can't only put the onus on kind of the cognitive abilities of our users, because most of the time we're distracted and we're just not going to follow kind of the best practice and follow that process through. So wanted to start off here by saying, well, of course, we all feel like this is kind of silly, right? We all have 2SV, we all look out for all these little telltale signs, making sure I'm on an HTTPS site, making sure the URL bar looks correct. So we should be fine, right? And we even have 2SV, multi-factor authentication. So why am I even here? Like, why am I even interested in all this stuff? So I guess what we kind of want to say is, well, the reality today of the two-factor authentication world is one-time passwords. One-time passwords, of course, or multi-factor authentication first. You all know this. I'll just kind of for completeness state this again. Multi-factor authentication is, of course, where someone needs to prove their identity by using not only something they know, but also something they have, right? So my password is in my head, it's something I know. I also need to prove the possession of some kind of a token. Now, the way that the industry has done this really is by making a device I own generate or receive some kind of a unique code, and once I have that code, I type it into another system, and then me knowing the code or me being able to retype the code kind of proves by transference that I own some piece of hardware, right? That's kind of the way that these technologies work. The challenge here is, while most of these one-time password-based multi-factor solutions can protect against things like password reuse, it really isn't effective at all against phishing attacks. There's also, of course, usability issues that's associated with these one-time password-based solutions. And I'll talk a little bit about these kind of attacks in a second here. So let's look at a typical phishing example, just kind of for completeness, right? And again, most of you guys kind of already know all this stuff. I promise there is a silver lining to all this. I want to talk about something else, specifically FIDO security keys. So you've got one score. FIDO security keys. And I want to kind of put the phishing example kind of in contrast with this example of using a security key and kind of showing you what the difference is between these two pieces of technology and why the one protects against phishing, or at least gives you a high level of assurance that something is kind of going to protect you here versus the other types of technologies just really isn't geared to that. So let's look at traditional authentication, right? So I have a user. The user is trying to log into Google. Typically what happens, right? A password is sent from the user's device to some remote party, and this signs the user in. So I'm proving that I'm me by giving some information over from my device to you, and this is typically, in this case, the password. So who can tell me what changed between this slide and this slide? Yes, exactly, right? Kind of hard to see, but that really happened, right? So that changes. Typically, what happens when this changes, of course, is a user might go ahead, not maybe realize that they're on the wrong website. Everything looks kind of cool, right? Except for the URL bar up top. And with funny Unicode characters, we can even make things look a little bit more real than that example. But in essence, the user goes ahead, enters their password, of course, sends it on to some attacker, and then the attacker has your password. And they send it to the real Google, and real Google doesn't know any difference, right? They're receiving a valid password from someone, so they're like, yep, must be the right user, you're logged in. Now, of course, if we think about traditional one-time password-based multi-factor technologies, the same kind of problem applies there too, right? Here, in this example, I'm asking you for a password, you give it to some fake dude, he takes the password and enters it into the website, and he's logged in. If the server on the right side here also asks you for a one-time password, you would probably be inclined to give that too, right? There's no difference, right? You would enter your password, you will enter your one-time password, why not? The system is asking for it, and at that point, the attacker can relay all that information to the server and sign in as you, right? So really no difference between a single password and a one-time password in this specific example. So you might ask, well, who's silly enough to type Goggle into their browser bar, right? If there's someone kind of lurking behind every bush, trying every misspelling for big kind of company names and just sitting there and waiting for people to like mistype? No, not really. We're kind of back to the example that Ameet gave earlier. People receive, like folks receive emails that look really, really legitimate. They click on links, and in the end, they get taken to websites that places where they shouldn't be, right? This is kind of still the most common way in which folks got tricked. Google has a report out, I think at this point it's like 3.5 years old, where we've done a study that shows for very, very convincing phishing emails, 45% of users still fall for that. So about 1 in 2 people will still fall for a pretty sophisticated phishing scam. And that really is a problem, and that's really what we're here to talk about. How can we stop that from happening without doing more training and trying to convince our users to like just look for all the kind of telltale signs, because sometimes it's really, really hard to spot. It's not as easy as the example that I just gave here. So let's look at what we can do to try and solve this problem. So really what I want to talk about is the security key. So the security key is a piece of hardware. I have one here, and if you're interested, I have some of these by our booth as well, and I know there's other vendors here at the event too that would probably be happy to kind of give you guys a sample of these keys. Security key is a device that can connect to your client platform, so either your laptop or your desktop or maybe even your phone. And I'm going to be brave and try to show a demo a little later. So I've got this phone here, and the idea is that instead of me only providing my password to some remote server, I also need to prove possession of this little key. The key comes in multiple form factors, as I said. There is a way to connect the key via USB. The key connects via USB. I can connect this key to a device via NFC, near field communication, so I can tap it on the back. And we have a third transport available, which is Bluetooth. So Bluetooth Low Energy, which means I can connect this key wirelessly over short distances to a device where I need the key. And we'll talk about where I need the key in a second here. So I've got multiple devices here. I've got a USB one, I've got a Bluetooth one. I'll show a demo using the Bluetooth one in a couple of minutes. So essentially, FIDO, the organization, the standards organization, is kind of the organization where we as Google took our ideas around this kind of phishing-resistant technology. And the trick here is, and I think the most important thing is, security keys was specifically designed to address these issues with one-time password-based two-factor authentication systems. It's been standardized in the kind of under this umbrella called the FIDO Alliance, a standards organization, under the technical standard U2F, or Universal Second Factor. And there's also a standard that we're kind of working on, which will be a little bit more encompassing of other types of use cases as well, called FIDO2. But the two are kind of very, very closely coupled, and you can continue to use your U2F devices in FIDO2 as well. That's kind of the work that we're trying to do there. So it's not like you have to wait and not implement anything until FIDO2 comes along. You guys might have also heard a standards body, W3C, that you might know. There is a lot of work that we're doing to also standardize this technology in the W3C right now under the standard called Web Authentication Framework. Talk about that a little later. So the devices are designed in such a way that they are inherently safe against phishing attacks, and we'll look at how that works a little later. So even if an attacker tricks you into revealing your password to their fake representation of an online site, and they get you to insert your token into your machine, and the token has a little button, and click that little button, they will not be able to use the resulting data that they receive to establish a session with the what we call in FIDO terms relying party. So in that case, the actual server that contains all your data. And we'll look at how that happens and how that works in a second. This, of course, is unlike the current one-time password-based systems where a successful phishing attack can still result in that malicious user getting access to your data. So really the goal with these keys are kind of threefold when we kind of went through the process here. They are safe. They're not phishable, right? That's kind of the first thing. The key is really, really easy to use, both for the user. You plug it into the machine and press a button. They are also easy for the administrator, and we'll look a little later at what that entails and how an administrator can enforce and set these keys up. And then lastly, they are also privacy preserving. Users cannot be tracked across services, and all key material remains on the key. So what that means is I can use this exact same key for multiple accounts on the same provider, or even the same key with multiple different providers. So today, FIDO is supported, U2F is supported by Google, Dropbox, GitHub, Salesforce, Facebook. I can use the same key with all those services without any way for that service to know about other services where I'm also using the same key. And even if those service providers collaborated on the back end, they will not be able to figure out that it's the same key that I'm using with all of these services. So really kind of privacy built in from the get-go. So let's look at that attack that we spoke about earlier again and see what the difference is when I add a security key into the mix. So here I have that same user. The user is trying to sign in to the server on the right. The difference at this point is that there is now a security key in the mix. So let's click there. The security key is a physical device. It's that black thing down there is my representation of a security key. But the security key also has a cryptographic key on it, right? So the way that this works is the very first time that I use my security key, I need to register it to my account. So let's say I want to use my security key with Google. I need to register my security key with Google so Google knows about it. What that entails is a public-private key generation process that takes place on the security key itself. A private key gets generated, and that's stored on the token. That's that yellow thing that I have there. It's virtual, right? It's not a physical thing. It's just a key that gets stored inside the token. And then the other part of that key pair, the public key, gets sent to Google. So that gets stored on the server side. So we now have a private key on the security key that remains there, and we have a public key that gets stored with the service provider against my account. So again, whenever I want to sign in, I need to prove possession of that yellow key down there at the left-hand side. Still doesn't prevent phishing, right? So we'll get to why this prevents phishing in a second. So I have kind of this system in place. When I try to sign in, I am going to send my password, just as per normal. But the difference is, in addition to sending my password, I am also sending a piece of data that's generated by the security key. And the three items inside that, what we'll see in a second, really is a digital signature. The first line item there says, I promise that a user is here. So how can the token promise a user is there? It doesn't have eyes, it can't see, but it has a button. So that means this yellow signature, that kind of assertion, will only be generated if the user explicitly touched a button on their token. So that's what the first part is about. Physically, there has to be someone present at the keyboard at the point in time where this assertion gets generated. So a user physically clicked a button at some point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a server challenge that you're really just echoing back to the server. In crypto land, that's just to kind of ensure that replay attacks can't take place, so the server gives a fresh challenge to the token every single time you try to sign in, and the token really just needs to kind of echo that back to the server. And then the last one, which is the really kind of novel part here, is the token tells the server what web origin it perceived when the user was trying to sign in. So in other words, depending on the URL that I'm on, that URL makes kind of a part of that signature that gets sent to the server. So if I'm on goggle.com, which we'll see in a second, that's what will be inside that specific kind of data element, right? Now, this whole thing then gets digitally signed by that private key, the yellow one on the left-hand side, and that gets sent to the server. So once the server receives my password, it also checks this blob here, makes sure that it was signed using the corresponding key. It's got my public key, remember, so it can validate and make sure it's my token that actually signed this assertion, and it validates individually all the data elements to make sure a user was present, to make sure that the challenge is fresh, and to make sure that I was on the right website at the point in time when I tried to hand this assertion back to the server, right? Pretty simple. So let's now look at how the security key defeats phishing. So this is our earlier example. I'm on the wrong website again, trying to sign in, handing my password off to the bad guy. Bad guy receives the password. Bad guy obviously also receives the assertion that comes from the device. But this time around, you'll see everything is cool, except for the origin, right? There is a mismatch there. Google would expect the origin to be google.com, of course. That's what it's going to look for. But because I'm not on the right website on the left-hand side, the item that's kind of inserted in there is not expected for the server side. Server expects Google, it sees Goggle. It's like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Of course, the bad guy cannot tamper with that block there, right? Because if they could only just replace the Goggle with Google, everything would be fine. They cannot, because doing so would render the digital signature that's over that assertion invalid, because remember, the token with their yellow key signed it, and the server is going to make sure that it's my key that signed it and not someone else's. So at this point, when we receive the assertion over on the Google side, that the bad guy will just relay, that's all they can do with it, at that point we will deny the login because the origin check has failed. Really, really simple, really kind of straightforward, but pretty powerful. So that really is kind of the way that security keys work. So let's kind of carry on and see how we can apply this in our own enterprise, right? So we had a couple of questions we had to answer first, right? Google has had the security key support for a long time. We've used it internally. We've rolled it out to all our employees internally. We have also enabled this for consumers. So if you're a Gmail user, you can register a security key to your Gmail account today, and you can use that to log in. But the problem that we've had is all our users are not only tied to desktops, users are increasingly mobile, so we kind of really had to work to get mobile support in there, and that's, when I spoke about earlier, having near-field communication and Bluetooth support in there. That's kind of work that was ongoing and that we've completed over the last couple of months here. We're now able to allow the security keys to work with mobile devices as well. Show a demo shortly. The next question is, in an enterprise, how do I actually go about deploying this technology at scale, right? If I have hundreds, maybe thousands of users, how do we actually go and deploy this technology across the whole enterprise? And lastly, how do we help the administrator if a user loses one of these keys, right? What do you then do? Like, are you able to revoke? Are you able to help the user sign back in? Maybe give them another pre-provisioned key? All these, little niggly details had to be worked out. So essentially, what we've done is we have built a solution that hopefully addresses all of these different bits here. This isn't a product pitch, so I don't want to talk too much about the actual product side of this. I'll just show a couple of slides. But essentially, we have a solution where you can go and you can now use these keys wirelessly to iOS, Android devices. You can use it physically plugged into any desktop or laptop device, as long as the device is running Chrome. That's kind of a requirement right now still. And you can enforce all of this through the Google admin control panel for Google Identity. So you can go in there, you can set this up, you can enforce it on users, all sorts of controls in there to be able to help users recover from states if they happen to lose a key, or if you need to revoke a key, or if you want to enroll a key on behalf of a user. All these controls are now in the admin control panel and kind of built in there. So basically, the security key management feature that I talked about allows the admin to provision keys on behalf of users, real easy, assist users that lose access to keys, and it also allows you to do some reporting, so able to kind of track security key usage inside your own organization, all features that was necessary for us to deploy this technology internally, so we're making it available to our enterprise users as well. One more thing that I can mention, and kind of Zach in his earlier presentation also alluded to this, even if you're not using any of the Google applications on the left, you can still use all of this cool technology that I just spoke about, because Google's enterprise security features can still be leveraged even if you use other applications, right? It doesn't have to be Google applications. You can use Google as a identity as a service provider and still get all of the benefits of the whole security story as part of the Google Identity offering. And you can sign up for that very soon. So what does this really give you? Well, we've kind of launched security key enforcement, the product that I was just speaking about, a little bit earlier this year. So that's available for everyone to use. The administrator can enforce the use of security keys on users, and security keys are supported on desktop and mobile. This is just from the Google perspective. Of course, if you're a developer or you are your own IDP, maybe you're a provider of identity solutions, you can benefit from all of this functionality by building security keys directly in your own applications as well. This is just kind of our specific instantiation of a security key feature built into our own IDP. But none of this precludes you from building security keys into any application that you might have and getting and reaping all of the benefits of this technology. So how do I turn it on? Really simple. Said not really a product pitch, so I didn't want to go through this too much, but really you click on, hey, I want to enforce 2SV. I only want security keys, because remember, if you still allow the user to use other forms of two-factor authentication, that's where the bad guys will strike, right? They're simply going to prompt the user for one of those vulnerable methods. So really the only way to get this true benefit is to disallow any form of other multi-factor authentication and really only go for the security key option. But we're giving that control to the admin at this point. So let's take a look at a quick demo. This is always the interesting part. So let's see if this will work. Being a little brave here, but since we have a little bit of time, we might as well. So if everything works, my phone should be on that screen shortly. Let's see. Yes, almost. Yeah, okay. Had me worried there for a second. Okay. So that's my phone on the screen. And essentially what I'm going to do is I am going to try to add a Google account to my iPhone. This is an iPhone. And this specific Google account that I want to add is a G Suite account. And this G Suite account has been protected by security key. That means I cannot sign in using that account on any device without having my security key handy. So because this is an iOS device, I have to use a Bluetooth key, which I luckily have in my hand here, this white key that I have here. This key has been pre-enrolled with this specific account, which means Google knows the public key for the specific account that I want to add on this phone. So I'm going to take my phone here. I'm going to open an application that we've released specifically to help users manage accounts on their iOS devices that has security keys on them. The application is called Smart Lock, so I'm going to open Smart Lock, and you'll see that I already have 2 Google accounts on my iPhone. Here I can go ahead and delete them if I want to. That's not what I want to do today. I simply want to add a 3rd account. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say add another account. And at this point in time, I need to enter the credentials of that account. So I'm going to do so. Click. Test with an S. 1. Sorry, this is the boring part. Okay. I wonder if I can tell Siri to type this. I don't think so, though. So there. And Google demo. Yeah, you all see my path, right? But you can have it because you don't have my security key, right? So it's cool, not a problem. So I'm going to click next. And then what we should see is a little pop-up. And the pop-up should say, it's now time to press the button on your security key. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to my security key here on the right, and I'm going to press the button on it. There's going to be communication from here to there over Bluetooth. And if everything works, my account should be added. Yay. Kind of underwhelming, I know, but still, it works. So really simple, real easy. You can do this on Android. You can do this on iOS. You can obviously do this on desktop by plugging the key in. So really straightforward. So that is that. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. And magic. All right, we're back. So thank you. Thanks for helping out. So we're back. Okay, cool. Hey. Okay. We'll take questions in a second. So that was the demo. That worked. This part of the demo didn't go as well, but like, whatever. That's mine. That's Mac. Oh, yeah, this is the last slide, so sorry about wasting your time. So chat out at the Google booth, please. We're there. If you want to use any of this functionality, you can now pretty soon use this for free, right? So if you sign up, if you're a G Suite or a GCP customer, you can sign up for kind of Zach's product that he spoke about earlier, and you can use all of this great functionality pretty much for free there. And you can read more of the technology at cloud.google.com/security-key. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Yeah? Dan's got a mic there. Sarah, thanks.
I perhaps have a pretty simple question that I hope I don't sound too obvious, but one of the things that bothers me about having keys that you have to carry around is that it's just another thing that you have to keep track of. And I was wondering, with this key, it sounded to me like you're sending over a message with using that private key that you had stored on it. Why not just have a virtual private key that you just store on your computer, and then you just press a button on your computer and have that do the encryption, all of the, encrypt the message and
right.
have the URL that you're going to be using that's wrong if it's wrong, and then it'll
right.
be checked on the Google side, and then you don't have to have an extra key for that.
That is a great question. Couple of things. I think the first thing for me is, remember the way that Google works, we really kind of despise login. So we let you log in as infrequent as possible. So if you think about having a Gmail account, you'll probably log in to that Gmail account on a specific device exactly once in your life. You log into your desktop, that account is going to stay logged in right there for a very, very long time. We're not going to challenge you for a password again, unless we notice something weird that would require that, but otherwise you're going to be logged in. If you think about a phone, this is much easier to fathom, right? If you have a phone, you add your account, kind of the whole concept there on a phone is not so much a login as more of a bootstrap. I buy my new phone, I add my account to it once, I'm probably not going to have to re-enter a password there ever again, right? So I stay logged in. So the point of vulnerability here is when I get a new device. So when I buy a brand new device and I have to enter my credentials that very, very first time, if I only had a built-in device to that machine, obviously that thing would not have any bootstrap information in there at that point because the machine is brand new. So I would need something external to almost bless or get trust in that machine that very, very first time, right? So there I almost would need some kind of an external key just to make sure that I trust this device. Now you might say something like, oh, that happens so infrequently, why do we even care about that? Well, remember, the hacker or the bad guy will kind of just at random, at any point in time, prompt you for a username and a password. It doesn't have to coincide with you buying a new machine. So it's like, if we can kind of clamp down on that 1 or 2 times a year when you legitimately type in your password, or that someone can prompt you to type in your password, that really is where kind of this anti-phishing capabilities come in. So what we could do is, one could argue that having a physical device like this to bootstrap a new device, and then continuously every 2 days or a day or whatever, having an internal device to kind of keep re-authenticating. Sure, one could do that, but if you think about the way that our technology works today, we really care about the bootstrap. Once you've established trust in the device, the trust is there. We're not going to re-challenge you again. We're going to remember that you've trusted that device, and we're only really ever going to ask you for that security key when something weird changes, like, for example, you buying a new machine.
Hello, my name is Dilip. So the question is this one, the phishing still happens, right? Because if a bad guy want to get the password, he is going to get the password. Still, he can go to google.com and he can get the password from the user, right? But what you prevent is basically he won't be able to access to Gmail or anything, right? Is it true?
That's true. That's why we are, I think, saying that this stops phishing. We kind of want to stop short before saying that. It stops the effects of phishing. So someone can still get your password, but they really can't do anything with the password on its own because they need that second credential, which they will not be able to phish. So while the password is still phishable, the other part of the credential, the signature part, isn't phishable because even if they have that thing, it wouldn't work for them.
I get that. So isn't it there a solution where you follow this 3-step process, right? First you enter the email, then you enter your password, and that's the point you are going to ask for the key, right? To press your key, right? What if you take out the step 3 and make it as the step 2, where you enter the email and then you press your button on your security key, and if everything is good, then Google can send back and ask you to enter the password. So it essentially saves the user from losing his password, right? Someone stealing his password. So is there any thought about that? And do you think it's a nice suggestion or something?
So that won't really work though, because if I'm a bad guy, what I will do is I will ask you for your username. I will then ask you to press the key on or the button on your security key, knowing full well taking that signature back to Google would result in an error.
No, it's Google now. You still have the host, right? You are going to check against the host name in the encrypted data. In the signed data is Google.
So let's go back. So if we look at this example here, so you're saying that the bad guy's in the middle, right?
Right.
Okay, cool. So the bad guy's there. What ends up happening is you first ask for the username, which gets sent all the way through.
Right.
Then Google, the right Google here, would generate a challenge. So it'll tell the phone then to generate, like, make the user touch their security
you
key.
won't do that, right? Because it's Google. Google, the origin is still Google.
Right.
So you on your server side, you are going to check against that, right?
But the security key button hasn't been pressed at this point, right?
After he enters his email, right?
Right.
So after he enters his email,
Yes.
the request comes to you,
Right.
Then you ask him to press the security key.
Right. But then the bad guy would simply go back and present a password prompt, right? There's nothing stopping the bad guy, because Google is in the middle, from immediately presenting a password prompt to the user, even though the signature of the security key would fail. I mean, they can always render a password prompt at their leisure, because they're in the middle, right? Yeah.
I guess the question is whether we can just keep the password.
Oh, that's a good question, right? So the challenge with skipping the password is then we are kind of moving from a multi-factor solution back to a single-factor solution, which means that now the attack is someone that physically comes and clips this device off your belt or wherever you have it. Now they have access to your account. But one could certainly, I mean, this is kind of the interesting side, right? Today we have password complexity requirements and all sorts of horrible things, which NIST has now actually gone come forward and said, hey, this is actually not such a good idea, we should have much simpler passwords. A complex password is important because that's the only thing that stands between you and an attacker kind of getting access to an account. The moment that you add something like this into the mix, you can reduce the complexity of passwords tremendously. You can go back to a 4-digit PIN if you'd like, right? Because now it's a much different equation from kind of moving from this is the only thing that stands between me and an attacker to having something cryptographic there. Right,
Okay,
exactly, your ATM card, yeah.
So
Actually, there was a question in your slide deck, which is, what happens if I lose the key?
Right.
You didn't answer.
Right, so if you lose the key, good question. If you lose the key, then you have to have someone help you out and get back in. That's why the security key only option is really something that we think works well in enterprise environments where there is an administrator, someone that you can go back to that hopefully knows you, can establish trust out of band. Once they establish trust, they can then help you to get back in. 2 options. The one option is they enroll a security key on their machine on your behalf and give it to you. That's one option. If you're remote and they can't do that, the other option is they give you a one-time kind of a rescue code, which you can type in and get access back. Of course, this one-time use rescue code is phishable again because it has all of the properties of a normal kind of a authentication attempt. So you need to be really, really careful. If you're a really kind of a paranoid organization, the best might probably be to not even go the route of the rescue code and ensure that you give the user a key in their hand that they can use to relog in. Yes, yes it is. Yeah. Right. The grace period is how long that rescue code will be valid. Absolutely, very astute, yes.
So something along the same lines. I don't know if you guys have this in your roadmap or anything. Have you guys thought about putting the fingerprint while you press the button?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, come to the booth for a more complete answer on this. That would essentially entail that we are now kind of adding yet another factor to the authentication mix. We're saying that using the biometric or the fingerprint or using the password is kind of interchangeable. One can imagine a world where maybe I have no password, maybe the only thing I have is a key and a fingerprint, but certainly that's stuff that is out there, and I'd be happy to chat a little bit more about that with you. Yeah.
Here
So
is one question.
can you enroll more than one key?
Absolutely, yes. You can enroll. Technically, there is no limit today on a Google account. We didn't impose a limit, so you can have as many keys as you'd like. The way that the protocol works, however, is once you sign in, all of your possible, what we call kind of key handles, all of the possible keys that you might have on your account gets kind of sent in the challenge over to the physical key. Because Bluetooth Low Energy is a pretty slow protocol, the more keys you have on your account, the slower that process might be. So from a practical standpoint, you probably don't want to have anything more than like 10 keys on your account, but technically there is no upper limit.
So I mean, if you had like 2 or 3 keys,
Right.
you lose 1 key, you're not locked out.
That's so the way we do things at Google is every employee pretty much has 2 or 3 keys. I have one here, I have one here, I actually have 2 on my keychain, so that's the way that we try to kind of solve that problem, but absolutely right, yes.
Hey,
Yeah.
here is one question. So if the hacker actually controls the DNS, he can actually get google.com, and to the user, the hacker will be google.com. So in that case, phishing would still happen. He can actually reproduce the same thing that he gets back.
So maybe just repeat the first part of that. How
If the
does that
hacker
set up?
controls, if the hacker controls the DNS, so he can actually pretend as google.com. So it will
Okay.
still happen.
So if the hacker controls DNS, then hopefully TLS would kick in, and they would not have the actual certificate for Google. So we kind of still rely on the properties of PKI.
Even here you're assuming that the certificate is trusted because somehow the hacker got some certificate which is trusted by the customer, right? Because it's rooting up to it is anchored to a trust which is already established.
So
Because
that-
the browser has the CA.
Right, so that's a good question.
Yeah.
The short answer here is we still rely on kind of the PKI hierarchy being kind
Yeah.
of met. We do things like certificate pinning and other stuff to try and protect against that specific type of attack. We have something else called token binding, which we can also
Exactly,
talk about,
so-
which does protect, and the
Yeah.
key kind of has that in there, but I'd be
Yes.
happy to talk more offline about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you.
So yeah, like Grant said, the token binding kind of, these tokens also support token binding, so there can be a further signature over kind of the token binding key. It does. It does. I actually removed it from my slide here, but on an earlier version, in that signature, I had the token binding side as well. Yeah, with little caveats. Sure.
Just a quick question. What's the value add of this over your mobile push solution for two-factor?
What's the value out of this over push? Over mobile push. So the challenge with mobile push is it's still phishable, right? Because if I'm trying to sign in, imagine I'm doing this thing here, right? So I'm trying to sign in, bad guy gets it, the kind of the sign-in message. Bad guy relays the sign-in attempt to your service, Google in this case. Google would send the push to the right user's phone. The user would be like, yeah, of course I'm trying to sign in. I'm actually doing it. They would say yes, but who would get signed in would be the bad guy in the middle, right? Because you don't have the local proximity, that really is the difference. One can imagine push solving all these problems, but then there would have to be some form of local connection between the device and the mobile phone.
Yeah, and a question about sort of what happens when Google figures out that there's a bad credential? Does it then tell the user, hey, somebody tried to phish your account? I mean, wouldn't that automatically trigger someone to have to reset their password?
That's a good question. So I don't want to go too deeply in kind of what we do. It certainly is a risk indicator, right? I mean, that indicates something is going wrong. That together with some other information might result in that type of thing happening. Normally, at the very least, you're not going to get access to the account. In some cases, depending on the way that kind of risk is evaluated, it might kind of mean something bigger, yes.
Hi, I'd like to go back to the question the gentleman in the back asked about DNS hacking. Isn't it true that if I were using Chrome and I was using this, that I would be protected even if somebody had hacked DNS and routed google.com to their own web server?
Right. Absolutely. That's kind of where the certificate pinning side comes in. So because Chrome pins certificates, you would still be protected even if someone hacked DNS and they were able to maybe get some Google certificate signed by a non-so-trustworthy, like maybe CIA? Right. Unless you have the token binding extension in, yes, absolutely. Okay, cool. I think we have one more. Over there. Okay.
So I just wanted to touch upon, he talked about it, right? So, we moved away from radius authentication, not to carry that dongle. So now we are going back to, okay, carry this one. So yesterday there was some speakers talk about FIDO specification. So the question is not limited to Google. Mm-hmm. It's a question of, the folks who work in FIDO specifications. And when it comes to, okay, you can store that, your private key into the TPM when it comes to the Windows world. But do you guys make efforts talking to, of course, Apple to find out how those vendors can part of this FIDO specification where we don't really have to carry those extra dongle, we can still do exactly what you guys are talking about?
Yeah, great question. I think that's why we're taking this work to, guess I don't need that anymore. That's why we're taking this work to the W3C, to get browsers and platforms, I think, to give them a little bit more reasoning or reasons why they should be doing this and implementing this technology. We would like in the end for, doesn't matter if you're on a MacBook or on an Xbox or on a Chromebook, these technologies should kind of be available to relying parties or websites, doesn't matter what platform you're on. So firstly, you should be able to use whatever's internal and built into the device. It should just be exposed and be there. If we kind of think back to 10, 15 years ago, most laptops actually, or a lot of enterprise laptops had fingerprint sensors, right? Didn't really go anywhere because it wasn't exposed. No one could actually, in a cross-platform way, talk to these things. I think that's what we're trying to solve with web authentication or FIDO right now, is saying, how can we actually address that problem in a way that it's kind of cross-platform and it's available to everyone, doesn't matter what platform you're on, you can kind of be sure that if this technology is there, you can access it and you can get hold of it, right? I mean, we can already start seeing things like on an iOS device, it's cool, I can go to my Bank of America app and authenticate using my fingerprint, but I can't go to the Bank of America website and do the same thing. Why not, right? It doesn't make sense. So there's a lot of work going on there in the standards world to try and kind of bring all those things together. saying that, if we all have this stuff built into our machines, we'll never have to worry about external dongles again, kind of may be right, but what happens when I buy a new machine? One can maybe argue that if I still have access to my old machine, that machine could be used to kind of bootstrap my new machine. Sure, you can almost imagine that maybe that's my phone, right? And I use my phone as a token almost, certainly. I mean, this is all possibilities. But what I just maybe kind of last thought here is, I don't think the technology and kind of the benefit here necessarily lies in the fact that this is a physical token. This is just the first instantiation of this technology, right? It was the easiest thing to get done because it's cheap and easy to produce. Where one can kind of see this stuff going is where all devices are kind of supporting these protocols and giving you this true notion of phishing resistance, where if I don't have one of these available, but I have one of these available, they should be interchangeable. Yeah. Okay.
So, very quick question. So, Google Authenticator is not phishing resistant, or it is?
Google Authenticator is not phishing resistant because it's TOTP based. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, guys. I think this.
Pitch Sam's meeting. Stick around.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sure.